The sound that tore through my house wasn't just a cry. It was a shriek, primal, jagged, and terrified. It was the kind of noise that stops your heart between beats. I know that sound. I heard it in Fallujah. I heard it in the mountains of Afghanistan. But I never expected to hear it coming from my 7-year-old son inside our own kitchen on a Tuesday night. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment on your city or country. I dropped my gym bag in the hallway. I didn't run, I moved. My body went into automatic override, the muscle memory of a Navy SEAL kicking in before my brain could even process the panic. I cleared the stairs in 2 massive leaps, my hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. The kitchen smelled wrong. It didn't smell like dinner. It smelled of Earl Grey tea and something sharp, metallic, and sweet, the smell of scalded skin. Evan, I warned. My son was curled into a tight, trembling ball on the linoleum floor. He was clutching his right shoulder and neck, his small body convulsing. Steam was still rising from his shirt, and standing right above him was my brother-in-law, Dominic. Dominic wasn't panicking. He wasn't rushing to get ice. He wasn't checking on the boy screaming at his feet. He was leaning against the granite counter, holding his favorite ceramic mug in one hand and the electric kettle in the other. He looked bored. What did you do? My voice came out low, a growl that vibrated in my chest. It was the voice I used when a threat was confirmed. Dominic shrugged. A lazy, casual lift of one shoulder. Relax, Hunter. The kid's clumsy. Ran right into me while I was pouring. I told him to watch out. I was on my knees instantly, my hands hovering over Evan. I needed to assess the damage without hurting him more. I peeled back the collar of his soaked shirt. The skin underneath was angry, blistering red. The water had caught him right in the soft trap between his neck and shoulder. Daddy, it burns. Evan whimpered, his teeth chattering from the shock. He poured it. He watched me, and he poured it. He's delirious, Dominic said, finally setting the kettle down. He took a sip of his tea. Shock makes them say crazy things, right? You military guys know that. Tessa, I yelled, ignoring him. Get the first aid kit. Now. My wife, Tessa, came running in from the back patio. She froze in the doorway, her phone still in her hand. Her eyes darted from Evan on the floor to Dominic leaning against the counter. What happened? She asked. But she didn't rush to our son. She walked toward her brother. Hunter is freaking out, Dominic said smoothly. Evan tripped, spilled the water. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal. I snapped, scooping Evan up into my arms. He felt so small, so fragile against my chest. Look at his neck, Tessa. This is 2nd degree, maybe worse. We're going to the ER. Tessa stepped in front of me, blocking the path to the garage. Her face was hard, annoyed. Hunter, stop. You're scaring him more than the burn is. We can put some aloe on it here. You know how the ER is. They ask too many questions. They'll think we're bad parents. I stared at her. My son was writhing in pain, and she was worried about her reputation. She was worried about questions. He poured it on me, Mommy. Evan cried out, tears streaming down his face. Uncle Dom smiled and poured it. Evan, stop lying. Tessa shouted. The room went dead silent. The only sound was Evan's choked sobbing. I looked at my wife. I really looked at her. For 10 years, I thought I knew this woman. I thought she was the soft, kind anchor to my chaotic military life. But right now, looking at her screaming at our injured child to protect her deadbeat brother, I saw a stranger. Move, I said. It wasn't a request. You're being aggressive, she hissed, crossing her arms. This is just like when you came back from tour. You're paranoid. You see enemies everywhere. It was an accident. I see an enemy right now, I said softly. I pushed past her, carrying Evan toward the truck. But before I walked out the door, I turned back to look at the kitchen one last time. I needed to freeze the scene in my mind. Dominic was still leaning there. And that's when the detail hit me. The detail that changed everything. You kept the kettle, I said. Dominic blinked, confused. What? If it was an accident, I said, my voice dead calm. If a 70-pound kid slammed into you hard enough to spill boiling water, you would have dropped the kettle. You would have dropped your mug. You would have reacted. I looked at his dry shirt. I looked at the heavy ceramic kettle sitting perfectly upright on the counter. I looked at the tea mug he was still holding, not a drop spilled on the floor. You didn't drop anything. You didn't slip. You poured it. And you enjoyed it. Dominic's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. A flash of pure malice crossed his face, quickly replaced by his mask of indifference. Go to the hospital, Hunter, Dominic said. Get your head checked while you're there. Tessa put a hand on Dominic's arm. She was soothing him. I walked out into the cool night air. I buckled Evan into the back seat of my truck, his tears soaking my tactical shirt. My hands were steady, but my blood was boiling hotter than that water ever could. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them in the kitchen window. They were talking. Tessa was hugging him. They weren't fighting. They were conspiring. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They thought this was over. They thought I was just a dumb grunt who would cool off after a few hours. They thought they could hurt my son and hide behind gaslighting and lies. I reached for my phone and dialed the one number I knew would answer. No questions asked. It was Ryder, my old comms specialist from the teams. Hunter. Ryder answered on the first ring. It's late. What's wrong? I need eyes, I said, watching my house disappear in the rearview mirror. I need the full surveillance package. Cameras, audio, remote access. The kind of stuff we used in safe houses. Who's the target? Ryder asked. I looked at Evan in the rearview mirror, finally falling asleep from exhaustion and pain. My wife, I said, and her brother. The war hadn't ended when I left the service. It had just followed me home. And tonight, the enemy made the first move. The emergency room was blindingly white, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a low hum that grated against my nerves. I sat in a plastic chair next to Evan's bed, my eyes fixed on the heart monitor. The steady beep was the only thing grounding me. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Harper with sharp eyes and tired shoulders, walked in holding a clipboard. She didn't look at the chart. She looked at me. She had been treating Evan for an hour, cleaning the wound, applying silver sulfadiazine cream, and wrapping his small shoulder in layers of gauze. Mr. West, she said, her voice professional but guarded. Can we speak in the hallway? I stood up, squeezing Evan's uninjured hand one last time before following her out. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. I'm listening, I said. Dr. Harper crossed her arms. I've been an ER physician for 15 years. I've seen thousands of burns, kitchen accidents, campfires, scalding baths. I know what a splash pattern looks like. Go on, I said, though I already knew what was coming. A splash is chaotic, she explained, using her hands to demonstrate. When a child pulls a pot down or bumps into someone, the liquid goes everywhere. It hits the chest, the face, the arms. It splatters in droplets. The burns are irregular. She paused, looking directly into my eyes. Evan's burn is not irregular. It is a concentrated, continuous flow of liquid localized entirely on the trapezius muscle and the side of the neck. The water didn't splash, Mr. West. It was poured. Someone held a container steady over that specific spot for at least 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Count it. 1, 2. That's an eternity when you are burning a child. Are you saying this was deliberate? I asked, needing to hear her say the words. I am saying the physics of the injury do not match the story of a clumsy collision, she stated firmly. The angle is wrong. The distribution is wrong. As a mandatory reporter, I am required to contact Child Protective Services and the police. Do it, I said instantly. She blinked, surprised. Usually, parents in these situations get defensive. They make excuses. They lawyer up. I want it on record. I continued, my voice cold steel. I want every detail documented. Photos, measurements, your professional opinion. Everything. I'm glad you're cooperating, she said, softening slightly. But you need to understand what this means. If there is an abuser in the home, The child cannot return there. He won't be alone with them again, I promised. Not for a second. I walked back into the room. Evan was awake, looking groggy. Dad, he whispered. Is Mom coming? The question felt like a punch to the gut. He still wanted her. Despite everything. He wanted the woman who had screamed at him while his skin was cooking. Not tonight, Bud, I said, smoothing his hair back. Tonight, it's just us. We're going to have a boys' night at a hotel. How does that sound? Room service and cartoons. He managed a weak smile. Can we get pancakes? We can get anything you want. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Tessa. Where the hell are you? You've been gone for 3 hours. Dominic is upset. He thinks you're going to try and blame him for this accident. I stared at the screen. Dominic was upset. Dominic was the victim here. I didn't reply. I needed to maintain radio silence. If I engaged now, I would lose my temper, and if I lost my temper, I would lose the strategic advantage. I needed them to think I was confused, maybe a little scared. I needed them to think I was buying their story just enough to hesitate. I took Evan to a hotel near the base. Once he was asleep, safe in the king-sized bed, I went out to the balcony and called Ryder again. I'm at the drop point, Ryder said. Got a tactical nanny cam set up. For units. 4K video, high-gain audio, cloud storage. Battery life is 3 weeks, or you can hardwire them. They look like smoke detector sensors and USB chargers. Perfect, I said. I'm coming to get them. I left Evan with a trusted neighbor, an old retired Marine named Sarge who lived 2 doors down from the hotel, just for 30 minutes. I drove to the meet spot, a dark parking lot behind a diner. Ryder handed me a black Pelican case. You realize this is illegal in some states if you record audio without consent. Ryder warned me, handing over the case. It's my house, I said. My name is on the deed. And they burned my son. Ryder nodded slowly. Light him up. I drove back to the house. It was 3 a.m. The lights were off. Tessa and Dominic would be asleep. I parked the truck down the street and approached on foot, moving through the shadows of my own neighborhood like I was back on a night raid in Kandahar. I keyed into the back door silently. The house was quiet. I crept into the kitchen first. The scene of the crime. I installed the first camera inside the vent hood above the stove. It had a perfect view of the entire kitchen and the dining area. I placed the second one in the living room, disguised as a new air freshener on the bookshelf. The third went in the hallway pointing at the bedrooms. As I was finishing up in the kitchen, I saw something on the counter. It was a notepad. Tessa's handwriting. Lawyer, 10 a.m. Thursday. Injury liability. I froze. They weren't just covering up the abuse. They were planning something legal. Injury liability. Were they worried about me suing Dominic? Or, I looked closer. Beneath that note was a brochure for a personal injury firm that specialized in defective product lawsuits. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. They weren't just trying to hide what Dominic did. They were going to try and blame the kettle. They were going to say the kettle malfunctioned, exploded, or leaked. They were going to use Evan's horrific injury to sue a company for a payout. They burned my son for a paycheck. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the counter. This wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated. This was a business transaction. I finished the installation and slipped out the back door without making a sound. I sat in my truck for a moment, watching the dark windows of the house where my wife and her brother slept peacefully. I had the cameras. I had the doctor's report. Now I just needed them to talk. And I knew exactly how to make them do it. I was going to play the defeated husband. I was going to apologize. I was going to lower my shield so they would get arrogant. Because when people get arrogant, they get sloppy. And when they got sloppy, I would be watching in 4K resolution. The next morning, I drove back to the house with Evan. I had coached him carefully. Don't be scared. Stay close to me. We are just getting some clothes. When we walked in, Tessa was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling on her tablet. Dominic was frying eggs, acting like the master of the house. The smell of bacon grease hung in the air, thick and nauseating. You're back, Tessa said, not looking up. I assumed you slept in the truck. You always run away when things get hard. I didn't take the bait. I needed access to the Wi-Fi router to sync the cameras I had installed the night before. We stayed at a hotel, I said, keeping my voice flat. Evan needed rest. Dominic turned around, spatula in hand. Hey, sport. How's the shoulder? Still hurting? Or did the doctor say you were being a baby? I felt Evan flinch against my leg. I put a hand on his head, grounding him. The doctor said it's a severe second-degree burn, I said, looking Dominic dead in the eye. She asked a lot of questions about how it happened. For the first time, Dominic's smile wavered. What kind of questions? About the physics, I lied smoothly. She said it looked like the kettle exploded. Like a malfunction. Tessa's head snapped up. Her eyes met Dominic's. It was a micro-expression, a flash of shared understanding. I had just handed them the narrative they wanted. I was feeding them the rope they would use to hang themselves. That's exactly what I thought. Tessa exclaimed, suddenly animated. I told Dom, that kettle has been acting weird lately. The lid probably popped off or something. Yeah, Dominic chimed in, leaning back against the counter. Piece of junk. We should probably look into that. Could be a manufacturing defect. I'm going to pack some bags, I said. We're staying at my mom's for a few days. Evan needs space. Fine, Tessa said, waving a hand dismissively. Go. Run to your mommy. Just leave the credit card. I need to buy groceries. I walked to the living room, pretending to look for Evan's backpack. I slipped my phone out and checked the app connected to the hidden cameras. The feeds were live. Crystal clear audio and video. I signaled Evan to go upstairs and pack his toys. I stayed downstairs, pretending to look for my keys near the router. I needed to ensure the connection was stable. Do you think he suspects? I heard Tessa whisper from the kitchen. I froze. The audio from the kitchen bug was picking them up perfectly through my earpiece. Hunter. Please, Dominic scoffed. He's a grunt. You point him at a hill. He takes the hill. He doesn't think. He just reacts. If he suspected anything real, he would have broken my jaw last night. He's been different since he got back, Tessa murmured. He watches me. It's creepy. Let him watch, Dominic said. Once we get this lawsuit moving, we won't need him. The settlement from the Kettle company could be huge, Tess. We're talking 6 figures. Think about the debt. Think about the loan sharks. My blood ran cold. Loan sharks. We have to make sure the kid sticks to the story, Dominic continued, his voice dropping lower. If he tells anyone I poured it, I'll handle Evan, Tessa said. Her voice was cold, devoid of any maternal instinct. I'll tell him that if he lies and blames you, Daddy will go to jail for leaving him unsupervised. He's terrified of losing Hunter. He'll say whatever I tell him to say. I gripped the edge of the table. They were going to manipulate my traumatized son into lying by using his love for me as a weapon. I walked back into the kitchen, my face a mask of calm. We're leaving, I announced. Bye, Dominic said, taking a bite of his eggs. Drive safe. I ushered Evan out to the truck. As soon as we were on the highway, I called my lawyer, a JAG officer I served with named Julian. Julian, I need you to run a financial background check on my brother-in-law, Dominic Vance. The one living on your couch? Julian asked. The one who just burned my son, I said. And I need you to check my bank accounts. All of them, even the retirement funds. On it, Julian said, sensing the urgency in my voice. What am I looking for? Everything, I said. I think I'm being bled dry. I dropped Evan off at my mother's house. She was a tough woman, a retired nurse who didn't take nonsense. When she saw the bandages, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled him into a hug and looked at me with eyes that promised violence to whoever did this. Keep him safe, I told her. Don't let Tessa near him. She won't get past the front porch, my mother vowed. I sat in my truck in her driveway and opened the camera app again. Back at my house, Tessa and Dominic were moving into the living room. Dominic was opening a bottle of wine. It was 11 a.m. To the defective kettle, Dominic toasted, clinking his glass against hers. To the payout, Tessa smiled. I watched them drink. I watched them laugh. I watched them celebrate the pain of my 7-year-old boy. Then, my phone pinged. An email from Julian. Subject: Preliminary financials. Urgent. I opened the attachment. The numbers were staggering. My savings account was almost empty. There were monthly withdrawals of $5,000 going to an LLC called Vance Ventures. But the kicker was the second attachment. It was a scanned document from a juvenile court record in Ohio. Dominic Vance. Sealed record unsealed due to the nature of the inquiry. Charge: arson in the first degree. Incident: set fire to a neighbor's garage after a dispute over a bicycle. He wasn't just a gambler. He was a pyromaniac. He had a history of using fire as a weapon when he didn't get his way. And he was currently sitting in my living room, drinking my wine, planning to burn down my life. I looked at the screen where Dominic was now playing with a lighter, flicking the flame on and off, staring at it with a strange, intense fascination. "You like fire, Dominic?" I whispered to the screen. "You have no idea. I wasn't going to just divorce Tessa. I wasn't going to just sue them. I was going to build a case so airtight, so devastating, that when the trap finally snapped shut, they wouldn't just lose the money. They would lose their freedom." I put the truck in gear. It was time to go shopping. I needed a new lock for the basement, and I needed to visit the local fire marshal. If Dominic wanted to play with fire, I was going to make sure he got burned. I spent the next 3 days living a double life. By day, I was the doting, worried father staying at his mother's house, taking Evan to follow-up appointments and buying him way too many Lego sets. By night, I was a ghost, monitoring the feeds from my own home, building a dossier that would bury my wife and her brother. The audio from the kitchen was the most damning. They had stopped whispering. With me out of the house, they felt invincible. "We need to stage the scene before the insurance adjuster comes," I heard Dominic say on Tuesday evening. He was eating a steak that I had bought for my anniversary dinner. "The kettle needs to look like the cord frayed. I can cut it, make it look like electrical failure. Just make sure it looks real," Tessa replied. She was counting cash at the table, my emergency stash from the safe in the master closet. "If we pull this off, we can pay off the guy in Vegas and still have enough for a down payment on that condo downtown." I muttered to myself, watching the feed on my laptop. "You think there's a we in your future." I saved the clip. Evidence item number 4, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. But the real shock came on Wednesday. I was digging through the deeper layers of Dominic's financial history that Julian had sent over. The Vance Ventures LLC wasn't just a shell company for gambling debts. It was paying rent on an apartment in the city. An apartment leased under both their names, Dominic Vance and Tessa West. Why would a brother and sister share a secret apartment? I clicked on the camera feed for the living room. They were sitting on the couch. Close. Too close. Dominic had his arm around her, his hand resting casually on her knee. They weren't watching TV. They were just sitting in silence. "You know he's going to fight for custody," Dominic said suddenly. "Let him try," Tessa sneered. "I'll tell the judge he has PTSD. I'll say he's unstable." The courts always side with the mother, especially when the father is a dangerous ex-military weapon. "What if the kid talks?" "I told you. I handled it," Tessa said, leaning into him. "I told Evan that if he says anything different, the police will take you away, and then Daddy will be sad because he won't have anyone to help him." I guilt-tripped him, Dom. It worked. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking with rage. She was using my son's empathy against him. She was twisting his love into a gag order. I needed to see this apartment. I needed to know what else they were hiding. I drove into the city, to the address listed on the LLC documents. It was a rundown building in a sketchy neighborhood. I didn't have a key, but locks are just suggestions when you know how to bypass them. I picked the lock on the lobby door and took the stairs to the 3rd floor. Apartment 3B. The door was flimsy. I slipped the lock in 10 seconds. The apartment was sparse. A mattress on the floor, a few chairs, and boxes. Stacks and stacks of boxes. I opened one. It was full of high-end electronics. Laptops, cameras, tablets. All still in their packaging. I opened another. Designer handbags. Watches. This wasn't just an apartment. It was a stash house. They were stealing from stores, or maybe fencing stolen goods. Dominic was a petty thief, and Tessa was his partner. Then I found the photo album on the floor next to the mattress. I opened it, expecting family photos. What I saw made my stomach turn. They were photos of them. Just them. From years ago. Vacations I didn't know about. Trips to Mexico while I was deployed. They looked intimate. I flipped to the back. A birth certificate. Name, Dominic Vance. Mother, Sarah Vance. Father, unknown. I pulled out my phone and searched for Tessa's birth certificate online. Mother, Sarah Vance. Father, Robert West. Wait, West was my last name. Tessa's maiden name was Miller. Why did her birth certificate list her father as Robert West? I stared at the document. Robert West was my father. He died when I was 10. The room spun. Tessa wasn't just my wife. She was related to me. No, that didn't make sense. I looked closer at the dates. Sarah Vance was my father's mistress. The woman he had an affair with before he died. Dominic was his illegitimate son. Tessa was Sarah's daughter from a previous marriage. They weren't biologically related to each other. They were step-siblings who grew up in a chaotic, broken home. But Dominic was my half-brother. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The man who burned my son was my own half-brother. And he knew it. He absolutely knew it. That's why he hated me. That's why he targeted Evan. Evan was the legitimate grandson, the heir to the life Dominic thought he deserved. You sick son of a, I whispered. This wasn't just about money. This was a vendetta, a decades-old grudge against a family he felt had abandoned him. He was destroying my life because he wanted it to be his. I took photos of everything. The stolen goods. The documents. The weird, obsessive shrine of photos. As I was leaving, my phone buzzed. A notification from the home security system. Motion detected, garage. I pulled up the feed. It was Dominic. He was in the garage, holding a red gas can. He was pouring gasoline on a pile of rags in the corner, right next to the electrical panel. He wasn't waiting for the inspector. He was accelerating the timeline. I checked the time. 2 p.m. Tessa was out shopping. The house was empty. Or so he thought. But then I saw the other notification. Front door opened. User code, Evan. My heart stopped. My mother had brought Evan home to pick up his favorite stuffed animal. She didn't know. She didn't know I wasn't there. She thought I was inside. Mom, get out. I screamed at my phone, but she couldn't hear me. I watched on the screen as my mother walked into the house with Evan, calling my name. Hunter. We just popped in for a second. In the garage, Dominic struck a match. He didn't hear them. He dropped the match onto the rags. The flames whooshed up, hungry and bright. I was 20 minutes away. No, no, no. I chanted, flooring the truck. Not again. I dialed 911 with one hand, steering with the other. Fire. Arson in progress. There's a child inside. I watched the feed as the fire in the garage grew, licking up the drywall, heading for the ceiling. Heading for the kitchen where my mother and son were standing. Dominic walked out of the garage, closing the door behind him to let the fire build. He turned and saw my mother's car in the driveway. He froze. He didn't run to warn them. He didn't call for help. He smiled. He pulled out his phone and started recording the smoke billowing from the garage vents. He was building his evidence for the insurance claim, letting my family trapped inside become collateral damage. I'm going to kill him, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I wasn't a husband anymore. I wasn't a father. I was a weapon, and I was pointed straight at the heart of the fire. I drove like a madman. Red lights were suggestions. Stop signs were invisible. My truck, a heavy-duty Ram, roared as I pushed it to its mechanical limit, weaving through afternoon traffic. Every second I lost was oxygen feeding the fire in my garage. I had the 911 operator on speaker. Units are en route, sir. ETA 6 minutes. 6 minutes is too long. I yelled, swerving around a slow-moving sedan. On the camera feed propped up on my dashboard, the situation was deteriorating fast. Smoke was seeping under the door from the garage into the kitchen. My mother was coughing, holding Evan close. She looked confused, disoriented. The smoke detectors finally began to scream, a piercing, rhythmic shriek that cut through the audio feed. Dominic was still outside. I watched him on the exterior camera. He was pacing on the lawn, acting the part of the panicked homeowner for the neighbors who were starting to come out. He was pointing at the garage, shouting something I couldn't hear over the sirens wailing in the distance. But he made no move toward the front door. He wasn't going in. I screeched into my neighborhood, jumping the curb and tearing across my own lawn, leaving deep ruts in the grass. I didn't park. I abandoned the vehicle while it was still rolling. Mom. Evan. I bellowed, sprinting toward the front door. Dominic turned, his eyes widening when he saw me. Hunter. Thank God. It just started. The wiring. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I hit him with a shoulder check that lifted him off his feet and sent him sprawling into the azalea bushes. I kicked the front door open. The wall of smoke hit me instantly. Thick, acrid, black smoke from the burning oil and rags. It was heavier than wood smoke. It clung to your lungs. Mom. Sound off. I shouted, dropping low to the floor where the air was clearer. Kitchen. Her voice was weak, punctuated by hacking coughs. I army crawled through the living room, my eyes stinging. The heat was radiating from the garage wall, blistering the paint. The fire had breached the barrier. I found them huddled near the refrigerator. My mother had wrapped Evan in her coat and was trying to shield him with her body. Evan was crying, but it was a quiet, terrified sound. I've got you, I choked out. I grabbed Evan first, hoisting him onto my uninjured shoulder. Mom, grab my belt. Do not let go. We moved as a single unit. I guided them not to the front door, which was now obscured by smoke, but to the sliding glass door in the dining room. I grabbed a heavy dining chair and smashed the glass. Fresh air rushed in. We tumbled out onto the back deck, gasping, coughing, sucking in the sweet, cool oxygen. I dragged them to the far end of the yard, away from the house. The garage was fully engulfed now, flames licking up the side of the second story. Is he okay? My mother wheezed, checking Evan frantically. I'm okay, Grandma. Evan coughed, his face streaked with soot. I looked back at the house. Fire trucks were turning onto the street, their sirens deafening. Dominic was standing by the mailbox, talking to a police officer. He was crying. Actually crying. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime. I walked over to them. My mother tried to grab my arm, sensing the violence radiating off me, but I gently shook her off. Sir, are you the homeowner? The officer asked as I approached. I ignored him. I walked straight up to Dominic. He looked at me, fear flickering in his eyes for the first time. He knew I knew. He knew I had seen the footage. It was the wiring, Hunter, he sobbed, playing to the cop. I smelled smoke, and I leaned in close, so only he could hear. I have cameras in the garage, Dominic. His face went slack. The tears stopped instantly. The color drained from his skin, leaving him looking like a ghost. I have you on 4K video pouring the gas, I whispered. I have you lighting the match. And I have you standing outside while my mother and son were trapped inside. Dominic took a step back, looking around wildly. He looked at the cop, then at the burning house, then at me. He realized there was no exit strategy. Officer, I said, turning to the policeman, my voice calm and steady. I need to report an attempted murder. Hunter, wait. Dominic stammered, reaching for me. We can work this out. The insurance, don't touch me, I said. Officer, detain him. Or I will. The officer looked between us, sensing the shift in dynamic. Sir, step back, he told Dominic. Just then, Tessa's car pulled up. She jumped out, shopping bags in hand, and saw the inferno. She saw the fire trucks. She saw Dominic being backed up by a cop. My house, she screamed, running toward us. Oh my God, my house. She ran to Dominic, grabbing his arm. What happened? Dom, what happened? Dominic looked at her, his eyes dead. He knows, Tess. He knows everything. Tessa froze. She looked at me. She saw the soot on my face, the cold fury in my eyes. And she saw something else. She saw that I wasn't the broken, confused husband anymore. I was the operator who had just dismantled their entire operation in one sentence. Hunter, she started, her voice trembling. Baby, let's just calm down. I am calm, I said. I'm extremely calm. Because I know exactly where this ends. I pointed to the burning garage. That was your plan B. Burn it down for the cash. We didn't mean to hurt anyone. Tessa shrieked, cracking under the pressure instantly. It was just supposed to be the garage. Officer, I said, pointing at the body cam on the policeman's chest. I hope you got that confession. The officer's hand moved to his radio. Dispatch, I need detectives on scene. Now. But the nightmare wasn't over. As the firefighters began to battle the blaze, a second explosion rocked the ground. A boom that rattled my teeth. The fire had reached the gas line. Or something else. What was in the garage, Dominic? I asked, grabbing his collar. Besides the gas. The stash, Dominic whispered, his face gray. The lithium batteries. The electronics. Hundreds of lithium-ion batteries from the stolen electronics. They were bombs. And they were exploding one by one. Get back. The fire chief yelled. Everyone back. We scrambled away as a fireball erupted from the roof. My house, the home I had bought with my combat pay, the place where I raised my son, was being consumed by the greed of the people I trusted most. But as I watched the flames, I felt a strange sense of peace. Let it burn. Let it all burn. The house was tainted anyway. I had the footage. I had the confession. I had my son. The war was over. Now, it was time for the cleanup. The street was bathed in the chaotic strobe of red and blue lights. My house was a skeleton of charred wood and wet ash, the fire finally suffocated by thousands of gallons of water. The air tasted of wet charcoal and ruin. I sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a paramedic checking my oxygen levels. Evan was next to me, wrapped in a foil blanket, sipping a juice box. He was quiet, his eyes wide, watching the firefighters overhaul the debris. Dominic and Tessa were in the back of separate patrol cars. They hadn't been arrested yet, just detained for questioning, but the cuffs were coming. I could feel it. Detective Miller, a seasoned investigator with a heavy coat and a no-nonsense walk, approached me. Mr. West, he said, nodding at the ruins. Hell of a night. You have no idea, I said, pulling the blanket tighter around Evan. Your wife and brother-in-law are telling quite a story, Miller said, pulling out a notepad. They claim you have a history of instability. They say you threatened to burn the house down last week during an argument. They're saying you set this fire to frame them. I almost laughed. It was so predictable. It was their last desperate play, gaslight the system. Detective, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my phone. Do you have an email address? He frowned. Excuse me. I have footage, I said. Cloud-backed, time-stamped, 4K video of Dominic pouring the gasoline. I have audio of them plotting the insurance fraud 3 days ago. I have video of my wife admitting they didn't mean to hurt anyone 10 minutes ago. And I have footage from last week of Dominic pouring boiling water on my son. Detective Miller stopped writing. He looked at me, then at the phone in my hand. You have all that. Sent, I said, hitting the button. Check your inbox. Miller pulled out his own phone. He scrolled for a minute in silence. His eyebrows went up. Then his jaw tightened. He watched the video of the burn incident. He watched the garage setup. He watched the confession. He looked up at me. His expression completely changed. Stay here. He walked over to the patrol car where Dominic sat. He opened the door. He didn't ask questions. He pulled Dominic out, spun him around, and slammed him against the hood. The cuffs clicked, a beautiful, metallic sound that cut through the noise of the pumps. Then he went to Tessa's car. He did the same. Tessa screamed, "You can't do this." He did it. My husband is crazy. Save it for the judge, Mrs. West, Miller said, guiding her into the back of the cruiser. We have the tapes. The word tapes hit her like a physical blow. She slumped in the seat. realizing the game was truly up. I looked at Evan. It's over, buddy. The bad guys are gone. Are they going to jail? Evan asked softly. For a long time, I promised. But I wasn't done. The law would handle the prison time, but I needed to handle the rest. I needed to scorch the earth so nothing could ever grow back to hurt us. The next morning, I met Julian at his office. I looked like hell, soot still in my pores, smelling of smoke, but I had a list. I want full custody, I said, slamming a file on his desk. Sole legal and physical. No visitation. I want a restraining order that covers the entire state. And I want to sue them for everything. The emotional distress, the medical bills, the house, the stolen savings. Hunter, Julian said gently, they're going to prison. They won't have any money. I know, I said. It's not about the money. It's about the record. I want a judgment against them so massive that if they ever get out, if they ever try to get a job or open a bank account, my name is the first thing they see. I want them to owe me for the rest of their miserable lives. Julian nodded slowly. Scorched earth. I like it. And one more thing, I said. I want to press charges for the dog. The dog? Julian asked, confused. You don't have a dog. I did, I said, my voice cracking slightly. We had a golden retriever named Buster. He died 2 months ago. Suddenly. The vet said it was kidney failure. But last night, reviewing the old audio, I heard Dominic laughing about it. He fed him antifreeze. Julian's face hardened. He was a dog lover. That was the final nail. I'll add animal cruelty to the list, Julian said, typing furiously. That's a felony in this state. I left the office and drove to the county jail. I didn't have to go, but I needed closure. I needed to see them one last time, not as a victim, but as the architect of their downfall. I requested a visit with Dominic. He was in a holding cell, wearing orange. He looked small. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the shaky withdrawal of a man who needed a fix and wasn't going to get it. He looked up when I walked to the glass. He didn't pick up the phone. He just stared. I picked up the receiver. He hesitated, then slowly lifted his. Why? I asked. One word. Because you had it all. Dominic spat, his voice raspy. You had the dad. You had the name. You had the money. I had nothing. I was the mistake. You were the golden boy. So you burned my son? I asked, my voice trembling with controlled rage. Because our father made a mistake 30 years ago. He wasn't your son, Dominic sneered. He's weak. Like you. I leaned in, my forehead touching the cold glass. He's alive. And he's safe. And he's going to grow up to be a better man than you or I ever were. And you're going to rot in a box. I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for his response. I walked away. I didn't visit Tessa. She didn't deserve my time. Her betrayal was deeper, more personal. She was the mother. She was supposed to be the shield. Instead, she was the sword. I walked out of the jail into the bright afternoon sun. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. We found an apartment. It's small, but it has a yard. Evan is asking for pizza. I took a deep breath. The air smelled clean. No smoke. No secrets. I got in my truck. I had no house. I had no wife. My savings were gone. But for the first time in months, the weight on my chest was gone. I drove to the pizza place. I ordered a large pepperoni and a side of wings. Normal things. When I got to the apartment, Evan was waiting on the porch. He ran to me, burying his face in my shirt. I held him tight, feeling the small, steady beat of his heart. Did you win, Dad? He asked. Yeah, buddy, I said, lifting him up. We won. But as I looked at the setting sun, I knew the battle was over, but the war for recovery was just beginning. Evan would have scars on his skin and in his mind. I would have trust issues for the rest of my life. But we were free, and that was enough. 6 months later, the courtroom smelled of wood polish and stale anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table, Julian by my side. On the other side of the aisle sat Tessa and Dominic. They looked different. Prison grays didn't suit them. Dominic had lost weight, his face gaunt and sallow. Tessa looked aged, her hair dull, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the screen set up for the jury. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named D.A. Reynolds, stood up. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the state rests its case. But before we conclude, we would like to play one final piece of evidence. Exhibit G. The screen flickered to life. It was the footage from the kitchen, the day of the burn. The courtroom went silent. You could hear a pin drop. On screen, Dominic poured the water. The sound of Evan's scream filled the room. That same primal, jagged shriek that still woke me up at night. The jury flinched. One juror, an older woman in the back row, covered her mouth with her hand. Then came Tessa's voice. Evan, stop lying. I watched the jurors' faces. I saw the disgust. I saw the anger. They weren't looking at a misunderstanding. They were looking at monsters. The video ended. Tessa had her head in her hands. Dominic stared at the table, his jaw clenched. The defense rests, their public defender said quietly. He knew. There was no defending this. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. We find the defendant, Dominic Vance, guilty on all counts, the foreman read. Aggravated assault on a minor. Arson in the first degree. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Animal cruelty. We find the defendant, Tessa West, guilty on all counts, he continued. Child endangerment. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Accessory to arson. Embezzlement. The judge, a stern man with no patience for cruelty, looked over his glasses at them. In my 20 years on the bench, he said, his voice echoing in the silent room, I have rarely seen such calculated malice directed at a child. You didn't just hurt him physically. You attempted to profit from his pain. You are predators in your own home. He sentenced Dominic to 25 years. No parole for 15. He sentenced Tessa to 18 years. As the bailiffs moved to cuff them, Tessa looked at me. For the first time in 6 months, our eyes met. Hunter, she mouthed. Please. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I just watched. I watched the woman who had vowed to love and cherish me get led away in chains because she chose greed over her own son. There was no pity in my heart. Just a cold, hard resolve. I walked out of the courthouse. The reporters were there, microphones thrust in my face. Mr. West, how do you feel? Mr. West, do you have a comment on the sentence? I stopped. I looked at the cameras. Justice was served, I said simply. But the real work starts now. Healing my son. I pushed through the crowd and got into my truck. Evan was waiting at my mom's house. Today was a big day for another reason. We were going fishing. I drove out of the city, leaving the concrete and the courts behind. I drove until the roads turned to gravel and the air smelled like pine and damp earth. I pulled up to the lake cabin I had rented for the weekend. Evan was sitting on the dock, his legs dangling over the water. He was wearing a new t-shirt. The scar on his neck was still there, pink and shiny, but it was healing. It wasn't angry red anymore. It was just a mark, a part of his story. Hey, Dad, he shouted, waving. I walked down to the dock, ready to catch the big one. Grandma says there's a monster catfish in here, Evan said, his eyes bright. Like, huge. We'll see, I said, baiting his hook. We sat there in silence for a long time, watching the bobbers dance on the water. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Dad, Evan asked quietly. Yeah, bud. Are they gone forever? I looked at him. I put my arm around his shoulders. They're gone, Evan. They can't hurt you. They can't come near you. I made sure of it. He leaned into me. I'm glad. Me too. Dad. Yeah. I don't miss her, he whispered. Is that bad? My heart broke a little for him, for the innocence he had lost. No, Evan. It's not bad. It's honest. You don't have to miss people who hurt you. Not ever. He nodded, accepting this. Okay. Just then, his bobber plunged underwater. Whoa. I got one. He yelled, jumping up. Reel it in. Keep the tip up. I coached him, grabbing the net. He fought the fish, laughing and shouting, his face lit up with pure joy. It wasn't a monster catfish. It was a decent-sized bass. But to him, it was a trophy. We released the fish back into the water. We watched it swim away, disappearing into the dark depths. That was awesome, Evan breathed. Yeah, I said, looking at my son. It was. We packed up as the stars came out. We walked back to the cabin, hand in hand. The darkness of the woods was around us, but we weren't afraid. We had walked through the fire and come out the other side. I put Evan to bed, tucking him in tight. Night, Dad, he mumbled. Night, son. I went out to the porch and sat in the rocking chair. I pulled out my phone. I had one last email to send. To Julian, attorney, subject, close the file. It's done. Don't contact me about appeals. Don't contact me about parole hearings. Handle it. We're moving forward. I hit send. I deleted the old photos from my phone. The pictures of the house. The pictures of Tessa. The pictures of the life that was a lie. I kept only the new ones. The picture of Evan holding his fish. The picture of us smiling. I looked up at the moon. The nightmare was over. The silence was peaceful. The fire had taken everything material, but it had left the only thing that mattered. We were survivors. And survivors don't look back. We just keep moving. I thought the gavel meant peace. The courthouse doors closed behind me, the winter air biting at my face, and for the first time in a long time I could breathe without feeling like I was waiting for the next hit. Dominic and Tessa were sentenced. The jurors had seen the videos. Evan was safe. My body finally started to unclench. That lasted exactly 48 hours. Julian called me while I was in the checkout line at a grocery store, holding a frozen pizza in one hand and Evan's favorite cereal in the other. Hunter, he said, and his tone alone made my stomach tighten. Don't go home yet. I need you to come to my office. What now? I asked, keeping my voice low. Evan was pushing the cart, humming to himself like life was normal again. They filed motions, Julian said. Plural. I felt my jaw lock. Who is they? Tessa's new appellate attorney, he replied. And Dominic's, too. They're challenging the evidence. Specifically, your cameras. I stared at the conveyor belt like it had just betrayed me. The jury watched the footage. Yeah, Julian said. And now the defense is arguing some of it should never have been shown. They're saying the audio was illegally recorded. I swallowed hard. It was my house. That helps, Julian said. But audio consent laws get messy. And they're not only trying to suppress the recordings. They're also floating something worse. Say it. They're asking the court to refer you to the DA for unlawful surveillance and tampering. My fingers tightened around the pizza box. The cardboard creased. I didn't tamper with anything, I said. I know, Julian replied. But the story they're selling is that you're a trained operator who staged this whole thing. That you set Dominic up. That you edited clips. They're trying to create doubt for an appeal. Evan looked up at me. Dad, are you mad? I forced my face soft. No, bud. Just work stuff. Put the cereal in the cart. At Julian's office, the conference room table was covered in printouts, motions, transcripts, and screenshots of my own footage, frozen on the worst moments of my life. Julian slid one page across to me. At the top it read, Motion to suppress. Unlawful interception of oral communications. This doesn't undo the convictions overnight, Julian said, watching my face carefully. But it creates a new fight. A technical fight. I ran my hand down my face. So what do? We go on offense, legally, Julian said. We prove chain of custody. We show unbroken timestamps. We show you gave the raw files to law enforcement immediately. We show no edits. And we make one thing crystal clear. You didn't start recording to trap them for money. You did it because your child was burned. I leaned back in the chair, breathing through my nose. What about the referral? Julian held up a hand. That's their scare tactic. But we can't ignore it. He pointed to another page. And then there's this. I read the header, and my throat went dry. Emergency petition, family court, temporary visitation request. My voice came out hoarse. Visitation. Julian nodded. Tessa is asking the family court for supervised visitation rights with Evan while her appeal plays out. From prison. I snapped. Not directly, Julian said. They're proposing it at the county facility, supervised. Her attorney is claiming she's remorseful and that cutting contact would harm the child. I laughed once, short, ugly, with no humor in it. Harm the child. Julian leaned forward. It gets worse. They're claiming you're alienating Evan and poisoning him against her. I stared at the document until the words blurred. I thought of Evan's face when he whispered he didn't miss her. I thought of how careful I'd been not to dump my anger onto him, how I'd kept it inside so he could breathe. What does Evan want matter? I asked. In a perfect world. Everything, Julian said. In court. It matters, but it's filtered through adults. Judges care about the record. And while her criminal conviction is a wrecking ball, family court is its own universe. I sat forward, elbows on knees. They're still trying to touch him. Julian's expression hardened. Exactly. That's why we don't treat this like an afterthought. On the drive back to my mother's apartment, I didn't turn on the radio. The silence felt like a pressure chamber. Evan was in the back seat, tracing shapes on the fogged window with his finger. Dad, he said, careful. Are we in trouble? I glanced at him in the mirror. His scar was fading, but it would always be there, like a reminder the world could turn on you inside your own home. No, I said. We're not in trouble. He hesitated. Is Mom still mad? I swallowed, choosing my words the way I used to choose steps in the dark. Your mom is making choices. Grown-up choices. And there are consequences. Evan looked down at his hands. Is she going to see me again? The question hit me in the chest. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm fighting to keep you safe. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than any 7-year-old should. That night, after Evan fell asleep, I opened my laptop and pulled up the cloud archive again. Not to relive it, never that, but to prepare. Julian had warned me the court would ask uncomfortable questions. Why did I install cameras instead of leaving? Why didn't I confront Dominic immediately? Why did I go back to the house? I could already hear it. People who had never lived inside fear trying to explain what the right move should have been. My phone buzzed. A text from Ryder. Heads up. Someone tried to access your cloud folder. Wrong password 3 times. IP routed through a VPN, but it's not random. It's targeted. My pulse thudded. They're still reaching, I whispered. Another message popped in. This one from an unknown number. You think you won. Family court is where you lose everything. No name. No signature. Just a threat that felt like a hand on my shoulder in the dark. I stared at the sleeping shape of my son down the hallway. Then I looked back at the message, and the old cold focus settled in. They didn't understand the difference between me then and me now. Back then, I was trying to save a marriage. Now, I was protecting a child. And if they wanted a new battlefield, paperwork, motions, hearings, I'd meet them there. Calm, prepared, relentless. Because the fire didn't just burn my house down. It burned away my hesitation. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with my laptop and a pot of black coffee, watching the security feeds of the apartment complex. At 6 a.m., I called Ryder. Trace the number, I said, my voice gravelly. I'm already on it, Ryder replied, the clicking of his mechanical keyboard rapid fire in the background. It's a burner, Hunter. But the signal bounced off a tower near the state penitentiary. And, get this, it pinged a tower near a high-rise in downtown. Specifically, the offices of Sterling and Finch. I froze. Sterling and Finch was the law firm representing Tessa. They were expensive. Sharks in suits. How were 2 broke convicts affording a firm that charged $1,000 an hour? They're playing dirty, Ryder said. That text was meant to rattle you. They want you angry in court. They want the unstable seal to show up. I'm not going to give them the satisfaction, I said, though my hand was shaking around the mug. I put on my only suit. I woke Evan up gently. My mother was taking him to the aquarium for the day to keep him distracted. He looked at me with those wide, trusting eyes. Will you be done soon? He asked. I hope so, buddy, I said, tying my tie. I really hope so. The family courtroom was smaller than the criminal one, more intimate, which made it worse. It felt like a cage. Tessa was there on a monitor, beaming in from the women's correctional facility. She was wearing a modest sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked fragile, remorseful. Her lawyer, a man named Mr. Finch who wore a suit that cost more than my truck, stood up. "Your Honor," Finch began, his voice smooth as oil. "My client acknowledges her mistakes. She is serving her time. But the bond between a mother and child is sacred. Mr. West is using his military background to alienate the child. He has created a surveillance state around his son. He is paranoid, controlling, and frankly, unfit to be the sole custodian." I sat stone still. My hands were folded on the table. Inside, I was screaming. "Mrs. West simply wants supervised video calls," Finch continued. "She wants to apologize. She wants to heal." The judge, a family court magistrate who looked overworked, turned to the screen. "Mrs. West." Tessa looked into the camera. She squeezed out a tear. A perfect, single tear. "I just want to tell him I love him," she whispered. "I made a terrible mistake trusting my brother. I was scared, but I never wanted Evan hurt. Hunter is intense. He scares me sometimes." I felt the eyes of the courtroom shift to me. The narrative was pivoting. I wasn't the hero who saved the boy. I was the scary, intense soldier who intimidated his wife into silence. Julian stood up. "Your Honor, this woman watched her brother pour boiling water on a 7-year-old and called the child a liar. And she has been sentenced for that," Finch interrupted smoothly. "But we are here to discuss visitation. Punishment is for the prison system. Rehabilitation is for family court." The judge looked conflicted. "I am inclined to allow one supervised video call per month," she said slowly, "to see if reunification is possible." My heart hammered against my ribs. Reunification. With the woman who let him burn. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. It wasn't a dramatic entrance. It was a paralegal from Julian's office, breathless, clutching a blue folder. She sprinted down the aisle and slammed the folder onto Julian's desk. "You need to see this," she hissed. "Ryder sent it. He cracked the encrypted file in the Vance Ventures drive." Julian opened the folder. His face went pale. Then, a slow, cold anger washed over his features. "Your Honor," Julian shouted, forgetting all protocol, "I have new evidence that speaks directly to the safety of the child." "Mr. Julian, we are in the middle of a ruling," the judge snapped. "This cannot wait," Julian said, his voice trembling with rage. "We just discovered how the defendant is paying for her defense counsel, and it speaks to premeditation regarding the child's life." Finch stood up. "Objection. Irrelevant." "Overruled," the judge said, sensing the shift in the room. "What is it?" Julian handed the paper to the bailiff, who walked it to the judge. "This," Julian said, pointing at Tessa on the screen, "is a life insurance policy. Specifically, an accidental death and dismemberment policy taken out on Evan West, dated 3 weeks before the burn incident." The courtroom went dead silent. Even Finch looked stunned. He checked his notes. He didn't know. They hadn't told him. "The policy," Julian continued, reading from his copy, "has a specific rider. It pays out double indemnity for loss of limb or severe disfigurement due to household accidents. And the beneficiary isn't Hunter West. It's a trust controlled by Tessa West and Dominic Vance." I felt the blood drain from my face. They didn't just want the lawsuit money from the Kettle company. That was the small game. They had insured my son's body parts. They were betting on the severity of the burn. If Dominic had burned him badly enough to lose function of the arm, they would have made $500,000. "They weren't just negligent, Your Honor," I said, standing up. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "They were harvesting him." Tessa's face on the screen crumbled. The mask fell. She wasn't the weeping mother anymore. She was a cornered rat. She started shouting at the camera, audio cutting in and out. "It was Dominic's idea. I didn't sign it. That's not my signature." "Silence," the judge roared. She looked at the document. She looked at the screen. Her face was a mask of disgust. "Mr. Finch," the judge said, her voice icy, "I suggest you sit down." She turned to me. Mr. West, I am denying the request for visitation with prejudice. I am also issuing a permanent protective order. If this woman attempts to contact your son again, by mail, phone, or third party, I will add 10 years to her sentence myself. She looked at the screen. Mrs. West, you are a monster. Connection terminated. The screen went black. I sank back into my chair. The air rushed back into my lungs. Julian patted my shoulder. We got them, Hunter. That policy. That's the nail in the coffin. That's conspiracy to commit murder for hire. I walked out of the courtroom. I felt lightheaded. The depth of the evil was bottomless. They had priced my son's arm. They had put a dollar value on his skin. I pulled out my phone. I needed to hear his voice. I called my mom. Hey, she answered. We're just leaving the aquarium. He touched a stingray. That's great, Mom, I said, leaning against the cold stone wall of the courthouse. I'm coming to get you. We're going home. Did it go okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, looking at the city skyline. It's finally over. The legal fight is dead. But as I walked to my truck, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't a text this time. It was a notification from my bank app. Alert, account frozen. Suspicious activity. And then another notification. Alert, credit score update. New inquiry. I stared at the phone. The legal fight was over. Tessa was buried. But the angel investor, the person who paid the initial retainer for Finch before the policy was found, was still out there. Someone had funded them. Someone had helped them set up the trust. And whoever it was, they were now coming for me directly. The war had shifted fronts again. I called the bank immediately. I need to speak to the fraud department. Now. Sir, your account has been flagged by the IRS, the representative said, her voice robotic. A lien has been placed on all assets due to unpaid business taxes. I don't have a business, I shouted, attracting stares from passers-by. I'm a retired petty officer. The lien is for Vance Ventures, she replied. Your name is listed as a co-signer on the incorporation documents. I nearly dropped the phone. They had forged my signature. Not only had they stolen my savings, but they had also anchored me to their fraudulent shell company. I was responsible for their debt. I hung up and called Julian. Don't celebrate yet, I said. They forged my name. I'm being audited. I'll handle it, Julian said, his voice tight. But Hunter, we found something else in the insurance policy trust documents. A name. Who? It's not a who, Julian said. It's a what. The trust was funded by a wire transfer from an offshore account. The account holder is listed as D.V. Sr. D.V. Sr. Dominic Vance Sr. Dominic doesn't have a father, I said. He's illegitimate. My father was his dad, but he never acknowledged him. Exactly, Julian said. So who is D.V. Sr.? I drove to my mother's apartment in a daze. I picked up Evan and hugged him so hard he squeaked. We ate dinner in silence, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. That night, I went into the war room, my nickname for the small study where I kept my files. I pulled out the box of old family photos my mother had saved from the fire. Most were singed at the edges. I found a picture of my father from the late 80s. He was standing next to a man I didn't recognize, a tall, severe-looking man with cold eyes. I flipped the photo over. Robert and Darius. 1989, Darius. D.V. Darius Vance. I searched the name online. Nothing. I searched criminal databases using Ryder's login. Darius Vance. Deceased 1995. Cause of death, prison riot. Incarcerated for racketeering, loan sharking. Dominic's biological father wasn't my dad. That was a lie Tessa told me. That was a lie Dominic told himself to justify his hatred of me. Dominic wasn't my half-brother. He was the son of a mob enforcer. And D.V. Sr. couldn't be him because he was dead. So who was using the name? I looked at the son in the photo. Darius Vance had a son listed in the obituary, survived by his son, Dominic. But there was another name. And his brother, Marcus. Marcus Vance. Dominic had a brother. I typed Marcus Vance into the search bar. A LinkedIn profile popped up. Marcus Vance, senior partner, Sterling and Finch. My heart stopped. The lawyer. The man in the expensive suit who defended Tessa. The man who stood up in court and called me paranoid. Mr. Finch. His full name was Marcus Sterling Finch. He had dropped the Vance. He was Dominic's brother. He was the money. He was the architect. He wasn't just a lawyer doing a job. He was family. He was cleaning up his brother's mess and using the legal system to destroy the man who put him in jail. You have got to be kidding me, I whispered. He had access to my financials because he subpoenaed them during the trial. He had my social security number. He had everything. I grabbed my keys. I couldn't sit here. I needed to end this. I drove to the office building of Sterling and Finch. It was late, past midnight. The building was dark, except for the top floor. I didn't break in. I walked up to the security guard. I have a delivery for Mr. Finch. Urgent legal documents. The guard called up. Send him up, a voice said. I took the elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened to a sleek, modern lobby. Marcus Finch was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. He held a tumbler of scotch. He didn't look surprised. Mr. West, he said, turning around. He looked just like Dominic, but polished. Sharper. I assumed you'd figure it out eventually. Though, I expected it to take longer. You're smarter than the average grunt. You forged the documents, I said, stepping into the room. You set up the insurance policy. Dominic is. Blunt instruments, Finch said, taking a sip. He likes fire. He likes chaos. I prefer paper. Paper cuts deeper than knives, don't you think? I can ruin your credit, seize your assets, and bury you in litigation for 20 years. You'll be homeless before the appeals are even heard. Why? I asked. Why help him? He's a psychopath. He's my blood, Finch shrugged. And you? You're the West family. The good family. Your father, Robert West, testified against my father, Darius. Did you know that? Your dad put my dad in prison, where he died. And then your dad slept with my mother. It was a blood feud. A generational vendetta I didn't even know I was a part of. So you burn a 7-year-old boy? I asked, my voice low. To settle a score from the 80s. Collateral damage, Finch said coldly. We needed the money to rebuild the family empire. Evan was just an asset. I pulled out my phone. You know, for a smart lawyer, you made one mistake. Finch raised an eyebrow. And what's that? You assumed I came here alone. I pressed play on the phone. The elevator doors pinged. Detective Miller stepped out. Behind him were 2 FBI agents. Marcus Finch, Miller said, holding up a badge. You are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Finch's glass shattered on the floor. You can't. I'm a partner. We have the wire transfer records, one of the agents said. And thanks to Mr. West's friend in cybersecurity, we have the emails between you and Dominic discussing the burn payout. I had been recording the entire conversation since I stepped off the elevator. But more importantly, Ryder had forwarded the decrypted files to the FBI an hour ago. Finch looked at me. The smugness was gone. He looked small, just like Dominic. You think this is over? Finch hissed as they cuffed him. Yeah, I said, walking up to him. It is. Because you forgot one thing about the West family. What? He spat. We don't leave enemies standing. I watched them drag him away. The office was silent. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. The money would be returned. The liens would be lifted. The monsters were all in cages now. Dominic, Tessa, Finch. The entire snake had been beheaded. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. It's done. The FBI is seizing the firm's assets. They're going to pay you restitution from Finch's personal accounts. You're going to be a rich man, Hunter. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to buy Evan a fishing rod. A really good one. I turned and walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. Going down. Back to Earth. Back to my son. I didn't open it. I walked to the fire pit we had built in the backyard. A safe, controlled fire that we used for roasting marshmallows, not for destruction. I struck a match. I held the corner of the envelope until the flame caught, watching the paper curl and blacken. I dropped it into the pit and watched it turn to ash. I didn't need to know if she was sorry. I didn't need to know if she missed us. Her words were currency she had already spent. Dad, check this out. I turned around. Evan was running across the grass. He looked taller. The sun had bleached his hair lighter, and his skin was tanned from a summer spent outside. He was holding a baseball glove I had bought him with the restitution money seized from Marcus Finch's accounts. I caught it. I actually caught it. He yelled, beaming. I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't hurt anymore. Nice work, Ace. You ready for the game on Saturday? Yeah, he said, breathless. Then he stopped. He looked at the fire pit. He looked at the dying embers of the letter. He knew what it was. He was 8 now, and he was smart. He saw the prison stamp before I burned it. Was that her? He asked quietly. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. I didn't hide things from him anymore. Secrets were for people who had things to fear. Yeah, I said. It was. Did you read it? No. Evan looked at the ash. He kicked a little dirt over it with his sneaker. Good. We walked back toward the house. It wasn't a mansion, despite the settlement money making us millionaires. It was a sturdy log cabin on 50 acres of land, far away from the suburbs, far away from homeowners associations and nosy neighbors. It was a fortress of peace. Julian had called me last week. The legal dust had finally settled. Dominic was 3 months into his 25-year sentence and had already been transferred to protective custody because he couldn't keep his mouth shut in the yard. Marcus Finch was disbarred and facing federal RICO charges that would likely bury him for the rest of his natural life. Tessa was apparently working in the prison laundry. Julian said she spent her time writing letters that no one read. We won, didn't we, Dad? Evan asked, tossing the ball in the air. We didn't just win, Evan, I said, opening the front door. We survived, and that's better. I walked into the kitchen. It was open and bright. On the counter sat a new electric kettle. For months, I couldn't look at one. I boiled water in a pot on the stove. But last week, Evan had asked for hot chocolate. We went to the store together. We picked one out. We faced the fear. I turned it on. The water bubbled. It was just water. It was just heat. It had no power over us anymore. I poured 2 mugs of cocoa. We sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the tree-line. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and freedom. Dad, Evan said, blowing on his mug. When I grow up, I want to be a lawyer. I laughed, surprised. A lawyer? Like Julian? Yeah, he said seriously. I want to put bad guys in jail. Like he did. I want to help kids. I looked at my son. The boy who used to flinch when a door slammed. The boy who was sold for an insurance policy. He wasn't broken. He was forging himself into something stronger. The fire hadn't destroyed him. It had tempered him like steel. You'll be a great lawyer, Evan, I said, putting my arm around him. The best. I looked out at the horizon. I thought about family. I used to think family was blood. I used to think it was a marriage license and a shared last name. I was wrong. Family isn't who you're related to. It's who you bleed for. It's who stands next to you when the house is burning down. It's who pulls you out of the smoke. My family, my wife, my brother-in-law, they were the arsonists. But we built a new family from the ashes. Me, Evan, my mom, Julian, Ryder. The people who stayed. I took a sip of cocoa. It was sweet and warm. The scar on Evan's neck was still there, a pale reminder of the night the world ended. But he didn't hide it anymore. And neither did I. We were safe. We were together. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't look like a threat. It looked like a promise. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind in the trees. The fire was out. Question for you. Have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to save your own peace? It's the hardest thing to do, but sometimes it's the only way to survive. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.